Hey guys, I just finished development on my first platformer game. It was the final section of a big course I've been working on and I wanted to share it and talk about it a bit. The game is called Tilevania and it's available to play for free over on itch.io. In the game you play as a little ginger-haired dude and you basically run, jump and climb through a handful of levels, trying to avoid hazards and enemies while making it to the exit. I think this has been my favourite game to work on so far. It was my first time creating a platformer and it was really interesting seeing the differences in the development process when compared to other genres. I'd say the biggest difference I noticed was how quick it is to produce a prototype when working on a platformer. Once you've got some movement mechanics in place, it doesn't take much time at all for the gameplay loop to take shape. With that said, you can spend countless hours refining the physics of some core actions. How fast do you want the player to run? Should they start at maximum speed or do you want to implement acceleration? How high should they be jumping? How far should they fall? How these actions are defined has a knock-on effect on how the entire game plays, which leads on to another vital aspect of platformers: level design. Ultimately, behind the scenes you're looking at a bunch of numbers with very small margins, and changing any of these impacts every single level. You want to make sure the movement mechanics are something you're happy with before you start creating levels, as otherwise you could easily break your entire design. Although it was initially a daunting task, level design ended up being a ton of fun. It was a chance to be creative and attempt to create levels that introduced each of the features I had developed, while also providing a good difficulty curve and making sure the game felt fun and fair for the player. There were a few interesting features that were covered within the course material for the game that I had never implemented before. The first of these was implementing a tile map, which allows for creating tiles out of sprites and placing them within the game world. For 2D based games this is an absolute game changer in terms of my skill set, and a platformer like Tilevania was a great opportunity to learn how to use the feature. Within tile maps it is possible to create special tiles known as rule tiles, which can have a collection of conditions created for them. For each condition, a different tile from the tile map can be selected so that when you place the rule tile anywhere in the scene, it applies the rules and selects the correct tile to place. This takes a while to set up and some practice to get right, as it's definitely something of an art, but when done correctly it allows for incredibly fluid level creation. The second major learning I got from this project was the implementation of a moving camera. Every single game I created within Unity up to this point had all the gameplay occur within one static screen, with no requirement to move the camera around. With Tilevania, in order to create levels to explore, I needed to make it so that the camera followed the player accordingly. I made use of the Cinemachine Unity package and set it up with a few different rules that allow it to track player movements, while taking into consideration the bounds of each level and the current state of the player. One of the most interesting features within the game for me was the use of rising water. When it was first mentioned within the course, I was wondering how it could be implemented, thinking it would involve some incredibly complex logic. As it turns out, in levels where there was to be rising water, the technique was to add a large amount of water tiles underneath the map and then slowly move this block of water tiles upwards while the game's being played. It was a really cool feature and it was achieved with only a few lines of code. After completion of the course material, I worked on various changes and additions for the project. Initially, the course material implemented a basic score system with coins granting score. I decided to rework this system and instead made it so that every 5 coins collected by the player granted an extra life. I then chose to place the coins in mostly optional or tricky to reach locations to provide a risk and reward style dilemma for the player. I liked the idea of having an additional enemy, so I created bats that would fly from side to side, and I implemented bouncy mushrooms as an extra platforming mechanic that could be used to reach different areas and provide more challenge for the player, presenting them with larger jumps. I decided that 5 levels would be a good number to have within the game, and with the new features I had created I felt I had enough content to fill these levels without them getting tedious or repetitive. I tried to isolate 1 or 2 features for each level and built the levels with those features in mind, while ensuring to make good use of all previously introduced features. I made a conscious effort to try to introduce new features early in a level so the player could experiment with them without losing lots of progress for making mistakes. Similarly, I tried to design the idea around the new features in such a way that they were self-explanatory. When you come across the first mushroom, the only option is to jump on it and learn how they work by bouncing until you reach the ledge above. Coin placement can be used in a similar way, directing the player and providing them with mini-objectives while progressing through a stage. I made each level larger and more difficult than the last, gradually increasing the number of hazards the player faced. I introduced water in level 2 as a basic hazard to avoid, and limited my use of rising water for the last level only. It allowed for implementing a time limit for the player in an interesting way, and applied some pressure that didn't exist in previous levels. Other changes and additions involved adding sound effects and music, along with creating screens for the start and the end of the game. I also modified the UI, hopefully making it much clearer for the player than just displaying numbers as the course material had done. Along with these changes came many hours of testing and bug fixing. I realised an oversight I had made towards the end of the project, in that I hadn't done any testing for the WebGL version of the game right until I was preparing to publish. I had completed all development tasks and had been testing thoroughly with Unity, but had totally forgotten to test my game within the browser. When I finally set myself the task of performing some full playthroughs of the game, as it would be played on the site, I noticed a massive game-breaking issue with enemy movement. Bats were flying different distances depending on whether the game was played in full screen or not, meaning that sometimes they would fly through walls and block the player's path. After initial panic and distress, followed by 2 hours of investigation, I identified and resolved the issue. But it's a good lesson to always test versions of your build on the target platform during the development process. I was able to push on and publish Talvania, and I'm really happy with the results. I think it's the best game I've made so far, and I learnt a ton doing it. I touched on it earlier, but this game being finished actually marks the completion of my Unity course that I started last year. With the course now complete, it's really exciting to think about what could be next. As I was nearing the end of Talvania, I actually paused temporarily to take part in my first ever game jam. I'll be posting a video about that in the coming days, and the experience was so good that I've immediately signed up for another one starting next week. So I'll hopefully be able to share info about that too once it's complete. Well, that's all for today. I really hope this video was interesting, and if you do enjoy this kind of content, please give the video a like and consider subscribing so I can build my channel and continue to improve. I can't wait to share bigger and better projects with all of you. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you again next time.